Call the meeting to order, and we're happy to have Commissioner Gehring back from his long time in Syracuse. Maybe we can give a round of applause for all that hard work you did for us with the Guard. He hates to admit it, but there's no place like home. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I invite you to join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Excellent. Thank you for such an enthusiastic Pledge of Allegiance. Roll call.
Gehrig?
Here.
Grinberg?
Here.
Pepcorn?
Here.
Strand?
Here.
Mahoney?
Here. Finance, Ken Costin's excited about this. The city received a $264,830 annual cash rebate in October from the city's purchasing card program, which allows bills to be paid by the credit card. Cumulative rebates since 2012 have been a total of $1.2 million. Fargo is the #1 client in the personal financial management card provider program, which includes more than 600 accounts nationwide. The program only earns money for the city. It also streamlines the administrative process. Not only does it save money, but it does the process as well. So we've been very happy with that. Public Health. Fargo Cass Public Health invites the community to a Heart and Soul Community Cafe on Tuesday, November 20th, which is tomorrow, from 11 to 1:30 in the afternoon at the Oak Room at the Fargo Cass Public Health. The menu includes potato soup, salad, rolls, and apple dessert with ice cream. All are welcome, no matter what the means to pay for the meal. The philosophy behind the cafe is to end hunger and food insecurity in the Fargo-Moorhead area by providing healthy and delicious food for all who attend. All patrons are welcome and will be served in a respectful and dignified manner. The suggested donation is $7 or any amount guests are able to pay. Sounds like a great base for lunch tomorrow, huh, Des? It's not too late to get the flu shot. Fargo Cass Public Health will host a flu shot clinic on Friday, November 30th from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. Regular and high-dose vaccines will be available. Anyone who wants to receive the flu shot during the clinic should bring Medicare or health insurance information when they're there. Inspections. Things keep happening in inspections, huh, Bruce? Okay. Commercial Building Inspector Mike Blevins has achieved certification as a Master Code Professional with the International Code Council, a premier code group that promotes certification and education to its members. The highly esteemed achievement takes many years of hard work and multiple certifications at numerous codes to obtain. Mike is the first individual in North Dakota to achieve this honor and joins a prestigious group of code professionals around the world, and will help us in code enforcement. Is that correct? Okay. Library. There are several interesting programs happening in the library in the next couple of weeks, including an Elephant and Piggy Party on November 21st, a movie series featuring World War I films starting November 25th, a visit and presentation by Tom Insern, author of Pacing Dakota, in November 27th, a Harry Potter celebration day featuring crafts and activities on December 1st, a story time featuring the classic Nutcracker with a visit with some artists of the FM Ballet December 4th, a holiday concert by the FM Choral artists on December 8th, and 2 Sneaky Elves holiday craft making sessions December 8th and December 11th. Sounds like a busy time at the library. Police. One of the organizations the police department partners with and who supports the PD when they are out in critical incidents and flood operations is the Salvation Army. The bell kickoff was held recently, and the area law enforcement will be ringing bells at the different kettle locations in December 11th. Chief Todd says ringing the bell gives the police a chance to interact with the community and help the Salvation Army to try to reach its goal. I think it's almost $1 million this year, isn't it, Chief? Yeah. And the chief, now that he's got the Oak Grove Leadership Award, is going to help lead that event. Is that true? Yes. Chief Todd reports there are 2 new sheriffs in the area starting duties in January. They have been working with the current sheriffs on transition for the departments as well as with the Fargo PD regarding the Red River Regional Dispatch Center, street crimes, and SWAT. Chief Todd has had the opportunity to speak with both the new sheriffs and is positive that good working relationships and partnerships will continue. He said it would be important to maintain those relationships in order to continue to work efficiently and provide services for several communities in one large metro area. Last thing you didn't tell us about, our old city hall gets one last duty, and that's to do a SWAT incident over at the old city hall, so they can gleefully go through the doors without any difficulties, right? No asbestos as well. Yeah. Is there a motion to approve the order agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the November 5th, 2018 regular meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda items 1 through 30?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Grinberg.
Aye.
Garrick.
Yes.
Pepcorn.
Aye.
Strand.
Yes.
Mahoney.
Aye. So we'll move to the regular agenda, an update on winter sheltering. Mike Redlinger? I have Nicole down, so.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. Nicole will be joining me as well for this presentation. We want to thank you for the time this evening just to provide a brief report on some of the efforts that the City of Fargo has been undertaking to support the homeless sheltering in a number of ways. We're certainly conscious of the extra effort and coordination and a lot of hard work with a lot of our community members every single day as we prepare for these winter months, and especially within our sheltering community, when the sheltering community moves beyond just operating at a full status to an overflow status. And we wanted to just tell you a bit about some of the activities that we've undertaken in the last couple of months just to try better understand how to support the shelters. The community certainly relies on a coordinated effort among the various shelter directors, and this is both sides of the river, Fargo and in Moorhead, as well as the VA. And this winter, we are happy to report that we're not expecting to need emergency sheltering for an overnight like we did last year, or to rely on the church sheltering program. Many of you have read recently about that program and about many of the churches moving in a different direction with that program. Instead, the local shelters are going to rely on a coordinated entry program. It's one that they've been working hard on, and we've been better understanding. And they will be working as a collective to provide transportation between the various shelters for the people who need assistance and present those specific needs within the sheltering community. We have several city staff members. Nicole's going to provide a brief report that have assisted with these efforts this past year. I want to thank them for all of their efforts. We had a great amount of coordination here in the last couple of months. We most recently met in November just to prepare for this winter, and I think there's a lot of good news, and we're happy to report on that this evening. Nicole.
Thanks, Michael. And actually, I don't have much of a presentation other just to summarize that we have many new construction projects this year that have recently opened up, so we're allowing more beds that will accommodate for that overnight sheltering. And again, as Michael mentioned, on both sides of the river that we're dependent on. Mainly, I wanted to explain our different roles at the City of Fargo. So we have Jan Eliason with the Gladys Ray Shelter, and certainly Desi with Public Health. Really, they are the day-to-day operations of homeless services within the City of Fargo under the City of Fargo umbrella. The Planning Department and Community Development, we help with that Community Development Block Grant funding and any of our social service funding as it relates to providing services like transportation and other assistance for the homeless service program. But otherwise, we rely very heavily on our partners like Pastor Sue Kosterman with Churches United, who's here today, and then Cody Schuler, the Executive Director of Fargo Moorhead Homeless Coalition to End Homelessness. So sometimes in the Planning Department, we work with these nonprofit leaders in the long-term goal of preventing homelessness, as well as the short-term goal of those day-to-day service providers and reducing harm. And so we're here to answer any questions you might have, but Commissioner Strand asked us for an update last year. Christmas time last year, remember the state of Minnesota had declared an emergency, and we had opened they had opened the Armory for overnight sheltering, and then that moved to Dilworth Community Services and our community center, and we got pulled in as city employees based on that emergency sheltering system and emergency need. And so we want to distinguish the difference between emergency operations as well as winter overflow status, which is the day-to-day operations of these leaders in our community.
Nicole, how many homeless are in the community on a daily basis?
I was afraid you'd ask me that question. When we get into data, I'm going to look to our data experts over here.
And also 850 is a pretty constant number, but John, you told us the other day that people are starting to be able to move into shelter now. We have a better ability to get some people into a shelter. I think one of the goals is to get people that are homeless into some type of permanent shelter at some point.
Yes, thank you. We are seeing people move into housing as we've made the transition from an old way of doing things to a much more effective way of doing things when it comes to housing. We saw 3 people leave the Gladys Ray shelter today and move into housing, which was certainly cause for celebration for us. But a number of things that the community is doing is helping to house those folks who typically have been much harder to house. They've been homeless much longer and have consumed many of the resources in our community. So we're excited about what we are seeing change.
And I'll just piggyback on that from the Churches United for the Homeless perspective. Some of our folks on the Moorhead side of the river, particularly in Clay County and the West Central COC, worked very hard on a grant. And the result of that grant has allowed 7 of our families who've been in the shelter long-term to begin to move into housing, which in turn clears shelter rooms at Churches United for other families that are seeking shelter.
Very good. Commissioner Strand, or any commissioners with questions?
If I might, and thank you both, Jan and Sue and Cody, and for the others who do the terrific work you do in our community. I guess my question is this: we're prepared for this winter.
We believe so.
Last winter, we were kind of caught with some changes of programming and service, and we got through it. And this year, it appears we're prepared pretty well. What's the long-term needs of our community? If you could just help us keep our eye on the ball of where we have to still continue to go for this population.
So if I could, I would just say a quick word about what's changed between last winter and this winter. So last year, we had just started a system of coordinated entry for shelter beds, and that was brand new last fall. And so we just simply didn't have the experience or the logistical ability to tie that shelter bed prioritization list in with the overflow. So that's one thing that's changed, and it's allowed us to have a much better understanding of the relative level of vulnerability of those folks who are seeking shelter beds. So now we've spoken, Jan and I and the other executive directors, through the spring, summer, and early fall about how we can manage overflow without needing an off-site location. That was enormously expensive, and the logistics were really difficult. And so each of the shelters has identified a number of spaces that we can use for overflow. We at Churches United are prioritizing for families and women. The New Life Center has opened up some significant number of overflow spaces for men. And I know that Jan has some spaces available as well, as does Dorothy Day. One of the primary differences between last year and this year is that those overflow spaces are tied into that shelter bed prioritization list. And so we're able to have a much better handle of who's in those beds night to night, and then to be able to move those folks from overflow spaces into the regular shelter programs where they have access to case management when a space in one of the shelter beds opens up. Also, we're networking with the local community action agencies to come in and do housing assessments with people while they are in overflow. Typically, that's not something that's been done until someone is in a regular shelter bed program and have access to a case manager. So those are things that have improved. Long-term, we still really need to keep the eye on the ball of affordable housing, and in particular, housing with supports for folks who've been long-term homeless. We see an increasing number of folks at Churches United and the other shelters of folks who are elderly and have really a whole host of high acuity needs. Some of that are folks who've aged into homelessness. Maybe they've been on their own and a health issue has caused them to lose their job, or maybe the death of a spouse or someone they've been living with has caused them to lose their housing. But another thing we're seeing more and more are folks who've been chronically homeless, who have aged while homeless, and maybe they've been able to get by all right on their own, but now they're aging, and folks who are unsheltered age at a much faster rate than those of us who have access to shelter. So the long term is to keep the eye on the ball of affordable housing and housing with supports. You got anything to add, sister friend?
That was pretty
Okay,
comprehensive.
good.
Thank you. Any questions of the commissioners? Commissioner Strand?
Thank you, Mayor. And I guess as just a final comment, we have so much to be proud of in our community, and it's folks like you who provide these services to the vulnerable members of our community, and there aren't words enough to thank you for the work you do, for the importance of the work you do, and the impact it has on individuals and families and their circles. So thank you all for what you do. I think it's really gratifying to go into this winter knowing we're ready. Not that we know what's coming, but we know there's winter here. It's come at us. It's already arrived, and the fact that we're prepared, that you've all done your due diligence, that you've gotten additional beds across town, additional services, and that you're still aiming forward, I just can't thank you enough. And if we can continue going forward with a reduction in harm, and a reduction in loss of life, and an enhancement of quality of life for our people, it's because of you folks and your teams. So thank you so much.
Well, we appreciate that, but I would in turn say that it has a lot to do with the community in which we live. We live in an incredibly generous and compassionate community, and other areas of the country don't respond to their vulnerable neighbors in the way that we do here, and that's something for the whole community to be proud of.
Thank you, Sue. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Jan, thank you. Item 32, development agreement with Dakota Beach Capital LLC. Jim Gilmore to explain.
This is a follow-up to a pilot request that you had approved in September. You had made a motion to approve a request for pilot for a 16-unit apartment building and directed us to put together the development agreement. We have now done that, and it's been signed by the developer. So this is just the final action on this particular 16-unit apartment building to be located at 914, 918, 15th Street North.
Is there anyone present who wishes to speak to this development agreement? Is there anyone who wishes to speak? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
Move for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Grinberg.
Aye.
Pepcorn.
Aye.
Garrick.
No.
Strand.
No.
Mahoney.
Aye. Public hearings, item number 1, plat of Fitzsimmons Edition in portion of the southeast quarter of Section 34, Township 139 North, Range 49 West on 5th Principal Meridian. It is 5080 38th Street South and 3805 52nd Avenue South. Approval recommended by the Planning Commission. Donald Gress to explain.
Good evening, Commissioners. Donald Kress of the Department of Planning and Development. As the Mayor stated, our item here tonight is the Fitzsimmons Edition, located on 52nd Avenue South and 38th Street. Here's I-29. Here's the Walmart. We've had a lot of activity in this area here and over here in the past year, as you may recall. This is a major plat for the Fitzsimmons Edition. This is unplatted property. The plat creates one block with 7 lots. Lots will take access from 51st Avenue, and here the developer is dedicating 80 feet of right-of-way for a public street here. So along here and then through this easement, and they will also be able to take some access from 38th. This very dark line is a negative access easement, which limits points of access, and of course it limits them off 52nd here. But they do have 2 accesses here. The applicant is platting this area to provide for new commercial development at this location. The property is zoned GC, general commercial, and so should accommodate the proposed commercial development. No zone change is proposed on this project. As shown, or as indicated in your packet, the applicant has also provided a development agreement, which has now been signed by all parties. Commissioners, you will notice in your packet that there is a conceptual plan for the rest of the area that's bounded by 38th Street and 52nd Avenue. I didn't put it in the presentation here, but it shows this area. This is a conceptual plan only. We asked the developer to provide that to just depict one way the rest of the property could be developed to ensure that there's connectivity and continuity with the existing plat. So when you vote tonight, you're just voting on the plat. You're not voting on that conceptual
So
plan.
they have a grocery store in there, but that's conceptual. That may not be true.
Yeah, that might be the case, sir. Yes, sir. So you're just voting on the plat. But those exhibits are nice to give you an idea of what could be there. So planning staff has not received any public comment opposing this project. The applicant, Rob Hardy, is with us tonight and may wish to address the commission. The Planning Commission's recommendation is stated in your staff report and shown on the screen. This concludes staff's presentation. Thank you, Commissioners.
Is there anybody present who wishes to speak on the zoning? Is there anyone who wishes to speak? Hearing none, we'll close the public hearing. Do I have a motion?
Move for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Grinberg.
Aye.
Garrick.
Yes.
Pepcorn.
Aye.
Strand.
Yes.
Mahoney.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Item B, hearing dangerous building location at 826 10th Street North, continued from the regular meeting of 11/5/18. Bruce Thorlson to explain.
Mayor, Commissioners, good evening. We have two properties for dangerous building hearing tonight. And I wanted to start out by explaining the continuances. We have always expressed that we would work with owners to find a good quality resolution to the dangerous buildings. And so we've continued both of these properties for that reason. So we'll start out with the first one, 826 10th Street North. You should have the packet in front of you. The packet has a suggested motion for you that I provided for consideration. Please wait until the end of the hearing. I believe the owners are here to speak, and there may be a change to that motion. In the timeline, you're going to see, I'll give you an abbreviation of that. You're going to see it provided all required notices and postings for this action. We have been dealing with this property since 2002 on many complaints due to dilapidation, junk vehicles. Permits have been taken out and never completed. The current action started with a complaint in June of 2018. There is a new owner on this property. He acquired the property in February of 2016. The property has remained relatively in the same condition since that time, with the exception of a dilapidated garage that was removed. The current owner took out a permit to build the new garage, and that was never completed in the last couple of years. Inspections has been dealing with this property for many years for various reasons, and we decided due to the many and varied reasons and the condition of the building to take the dangerous building action. The assessors has provided with a statement of valuation that attests to the deterioration of this building. The valuation, I want to say, is only one determining factor, but is a major one that we use that's in our ordinance, and a major factor that allows us to use the process. We placarded the building on July 10th of 2018, and we've monitored ever since. We've postponed the hearings due to the owner's request to save this house. We've worked with the owner, giving him time to address stipulations that we required on the dangerous building posting. On Thursday of last week, we did receive, I'll say, half of the requirements for us to write a permit. There are still two outstanding requirements. At this time, we will allow the writing of a permit with the following stipulations. Structural engineering provided and approved. All previous stipulations agreed to or complied with. The property and the exterior grounds are brought into compliance and kept in compliance. And the building and subcontractor permits are written by December 7th, 2018, with an expiration date of 6 months, which the owner has agreed to. Any questions on this property? I believe the owner is here, would like to.
Anyone present who wishes to speak to these properties?
So then, while the gentleman's coming up, maybe just a question.
Yes.
Bruce, thanks for the thorough packet and then the explanation. So is it fair to say you've reached a compromise? Is it fair to say that you've reached a compromise with the property?
We have. And there's a couple issues that still need to be addressed. And so I have an alternate motion
Okay.
that I would pass out if, after the owner speaks.
Mayor and Commissioners, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm sorry, wish it was different circumstances, but
Could you just give us your name, please?
my name is Lee Allen. I am the current owner of this property. Now, I didn't realize there was complaints back to 2002. It is true. I've had it for about 2 years. This last year being one of the 10th Street being torn up I couldn't even get to the property. It's on the corner of 9th Avenue and 10th Street. The contractor was using the yard as a layout for their rebar and other equipment that they were doing, and culverts and things like that on 10th Street. Yes, it is a dilapidated, it does not look good, and I'm sure you've probably received complaints from neighbors because of it. No excuse that I haven't got to it since till now, but structurally, it's a good house. I own 35 homes in town. I know what a good house, or if it's salvageable or saved, can be whatever. But I do know that it can be actually a very nice house in the neighborhood, and that the neighbors will indeed be happy with it as being part of the neighborhood. I don't think it would be a shame to have to tear it down. So, with due respect to the inspection department, of which I do have immense amount of respect for, I plan on fixing it. I plan on getting it done in the timeline asked for. I know I'm missing a couple things, one being a heating contractor. I thought I had one, but he's not licensed, I guess, in the state. But, and I'm waiting on structural drawings. But I do feel that it is a solid structure once it's corrected. And I'm willing to do that with your permission.
And you anticipate keeping to the timeline?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Bruce, do you have the amended? Is there anybody else who wishes to speak to the public? If not, we'll close the public hearing. Do I have a motion?
I'd move the recommended motion just handed out.
And do we have to do anything for the first structure, or is this combined in this one?
That motion, the amended motion should work
Okay.
for the whole project. It's got the timeline, it's got the
Is there a second?
stipulation.
Second.
Second.
Any further discussion?
I would just like to commend you for coming in and sharing your perspective and working with us. We've had some debate lately, a discussion and being a little more firm, working with neighbors and neighborhoods. And, I'm a big believer in property rights, but there's also ordinances and things we have to follow. And I just commend you for working with Bruce and finding a compromise and committing to fixing up the property, because it's only going to improve the neighborhood. And I just want to thank you.
Any other discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Grinberg,
Aye.
Pepcorn,
Aye.
Gehrig,
Yes.
Strand,
Yes.
Mahoney.
Aye. Well, I believe we're at 34, right? Bruce, are you done?
Yes. No.
C?
See?
Current
Next
Ages
prop-
Building located at 1101 7th Street North, continued from 9/24 and 10/22 regular meetings. Bruce Thorolson.
Thank you. The second property is 1101 7th Street North. Again, you have a packet with a suggested motion, and again, I'll wait till the end of the meeting. We may have an alternative. When inspections first visited this property, there was an elderly woman living at this home. And I had two inspectors go do the inspection. The woman did not appear to be living in a good environment. The inspectors at their first inspection knew that she should not be living in this home. They inquired of her, and she said that she did not want to leave. So we went back and did a little research. We found out that other city and county health people had been dealing with this woman that was living in the house. They were aware of the situation. The daughter of the owner, Melody, had moved back to Fargo years ago to help take care of the mother. She was also aware of the conditions in the house. She told us that she knew the best course of action would be that if the mother did move out of the house, so she could deal with the issues. Melody did call me this afternoon. She said she would be in attendance here tonight and speak. There were other people living in the house that we didn't know if they were related or not, which resulted in police department activity at this house. The daughter, acting as the representative of the owner, came in, and we've had several meetings with her to try and reach a compromise on what the resolution would be for the house. We've had meetings with the family and the bank, because there is a mortgage on the house also. After the mother was out of the house due to a court action, inspections helped arrange a free dumpster with solid waste so that the family could take care of some junk and take care of the house. Inspector Bill Thompson, who also works with the housing rehab program, thought about bringing planning, had meetings with planning and see if there was some CDB fund or grant programs that could help with the resolution on this house. And Tia Braceth with the planning department has been working on that, and that continues today. A little about the timeline, just the major points. The action started with a complaint in July of 2018, and the complaint came to our office through the health department. We placarded the house on July 10th, and we've monitored it ever since. From our property records, it appears that this house has been in this condition for at least 6, 7, 8 years. You'll see from the timeline we provided all the required notices and postings for the dangerous building action. The property has not had water, sewer, gas, or electric service for some time. There's no heat, no running water, and the interior conditions are not habitable. Other issues with the house have been flooding due to sewer backup, water pipe breaks, animals living in the house that were not allowed to go outside, rodent infestation, vagrant activity, health safety issues, and the structure not being sound. There's been no action by the owner, to my knowledge, to provide resolution with the issues, because we're always working with her toward getting the house vacant and then the demolition of the house. And both the owner and the bank were favorable toward demolition. We postponed hearings due to the owner's request of finding favorable resolution. The assessors have given us statement of valuation that tests the deterioration. We thought this case would be solved by agreement, but we did find out last week the owner has listed the property, which changed things a little bit. So I suggest making the motion to allow inspections to act on the house at this time, and the owner's going to have some statements, and maybe we can make a little adjustment on the motion. So I'll yield.
Anybody present who wishes to speak?
Hello, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Alex Diana, and this is my mother, Melody Drayen. We are both conservators on the house and guardians of Marilyn Kohler, the owner of the home presently yet. We do have paperwork here showing that we are indeed, as I said we were, and the fact also that the reason for the house listing is because a court document here signed by Judge Irby of North Dakota says that the house estate is supposed to be used in the welfare and well-being of my grandmother, Marilyn Lee Kohler. And I can pass that too if you would like.
Thank you.
I just wanted to state that we were living in the state of Arizona prior to all of this going on. Before we left, we did have the house relatively cleaned out, and she was doing fine. I got notification from the Pima County Sheriff's Department that I needed, that they had papers for me to contact, is it Birch Verdict of North Dakota? Due to the fact that there were several social workers that needed, Carla Odegaard was one of them that needed to contact me right away in regards to mom's health. we immediately came back up here. My husband and I uprooted our family. We moved back up here to take care of Mom. We then found out that Mom has got a rare case of dementia, which is called frontal lobe vascular dementia. She can carry on a conversation and no one would ever know that she had this, which leads to her rationalization and decision-making. It's not happening for her. So we have been fighting to get guardianship of Mom for almost a year and a half. We've been working with JD Legal Planning Law Firm, and Susan Johnson Drenth is our lawyer. Jeff Gunkelman was my mom's guardian ad litem that we had hired. We finally got what they call a temporary guardianship for Mom, but we were misrepresented by the attorney that we had prior, that we only had say over her medical and her financial of the estate. We didn't have any say on the estate. Therefore, we had no right to, put it up for sale or anything. We finally got back into court on November 7th, and we spoke with Judge Irby, and he now gave us permission that we can put the listing, or the house listed, and we have got EXP Realty, we have Jeremy Qualley that's working on it, because we have to get the mortgage paid off and so on and so forth. We have had several people that are interested in buying the property to tear it down and rebuild, or they want to restore the house for people that are low income or homeless people that are willing to, to make offers on the house. But unfortunately, because we are upfront with everybody, we tell them it's a dangerous building and it's been coded and everything is on the doors. We are having Jeremy Qualley hire an engineer that will go back in there and reassess it. Now, we have cleaned out, the animals have been put up for adoption for love of dogs. We had the cat that went into a shelter. We have cleaned the whole place out. And with the help of Bill and Bruce, we had the dumpsters where we could get a majority of that stuff out. And so it is in much better shape than it was when they first went in there. But I knew I had to get Mom out of this situation in which she is at Mapleview. However, we just discovered today that Mapleview is releasing her because they say she doesn't qualify for basic or skilled care. So I talked with Dr. Susan Wood, who is her neuropsychologist at Sanford, and she is writing a letter stating the fact that Mom can leave as long as she is under supervision of us. So what I'm asking for, sir, is if we could get an extension of time so we can get this engineer in there to get these potential buyers that will come and buy the property and make use of it. But we need to make sure that, the engineer is recommending that it's safe for people to enter and look at it. But that way it would, it saves, the taxpayers and the city and county to spend funds for demolishing this house, where if there's somebody that can do it and rebuild something positive in the neighborhood. I've spoken to a lot of the neighbors that knew Mom really well. They think it's a really good idea, and we are just asking for a chance to do that. But we have been cleaning up the yard. We've, done everything that we can, but I don't want to put a whole lot more money into it if someone's going to come in and tear it down.
One thing I would also like to add is that the house does have quite a bit of history on it. It was built in 1897, is connected technically to the south side of Fargo's electric system and grid. And that holds a lot of value to some people. I see we've had offers come in saying they wanted to refurbish the house, get it back to how it was. And that, that historical mark, granted it's just a house, is still something that shows the history of Fargo and where we came from.
Right. I mean, we've been one family owner of that house, and it has been handed down for generations. But it's time that North Fargo see a change in that area. We have had several neighbors who have got houses there that want to buy it, tear it down, and rebuild a new house there. So we want to see the positive for the neighborhood. And it's just something that we just need a little more time
Sure.
to have Jeremy get this done. And, you know, I spoke with Jeremy Qualley today, and he said, you know, if we could even get until, you know, like February 1st, because we got 2 holidays, and we're trying to get bids in, but we still have to have the clearing, and we're at the mercy of the engineer.
Yeah,
because
let's let Bruce come back up. Thank you very much. We understand your dilemma. Bruce, the modified motion would be what?
The amount of time you think is right. We're going to want the quickest time for everybody we're dealing with, but it's really up to you. How much time is required for the owner to do what they say?
So as simple as a motion just to grant an extension?
Just to change, revise the date
Okay.
in the motion.
I would move March 1st, 2019.
Is there a second?
I'll second it for discussion.
The other issue I think you want to look at is what do you come out best for the estate for your mother? Because, I mean, some of the things go back and forth. You spend money to fix it up, and then it, you know, what you're going to get paid as far as a real estate agent or whatever. So I think your team should work with them as best financial outcome for their mother's estate, if you would help them with that. Any other commissioners?
If they get an engineer to come in and say that the house is suitable for people to walk through, does that hold water? Because you guys are saying it's dangerous.
We are based on everything we know. The animals living in there, the flooding, the structure, we don't know. How the floors, are they stable, things like that.
So we're not aware of that right now. We just don't know.
Correct.
Okay.
We
so
just
if they
need
had
to
an engineer
know.
come in and prove that it is okay, then that what they're saying is correct.
Nobody wanted to go into that house.
Gotcha. Okay.
Commissioner Goering, do you have a rental house? You want to go and inspect it, or no? Okay. Any other discussion? Motion is to extend till March 1st. Roll call vote, please.
Grinberg?
Aye.
Gehrig?
Yes.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Aye. Thank you. Item 34, recommendation, Chuck Hogue, go to the Growth Initiative Fund Board.
Move
You have my recommendation?
Move for approval?
Is there a second?
Second.
I think he does a great job. Thank you. Roll call vote?
Grinberg?
Aye.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Gehrig?
Yes.
Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Aye. Next, item 35, the attorney will provide status report from our municipal airport authority. We've had some discussion with the airport authority on an MOU, which has been ongoing, and Eric will explain a lot of this, but recently we had a request for a salary change, which kind of brings us to a head. So what we're going to do is just discuss tonight what's going on so people understand a little bit of the history, and Eric will explain why we'd have to go to an executive session after that point. I know Eric Lind is here and Tammy Lynn is here from the airport authority. I don't see, and Colonel Haugen is there as well, sorry, retired general. But it's really initiated because of a request to change some salaries, and the reality is what we really have to look at is our MOU, and this has been something that's been kicked down the can for quite a while. I think tonight we'll try to get some resolution to it.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. Again, I have a bit of a presentation here, and there's quite a bit of information to go over, but I'll try and move through it as smoothly as I can. Basically, I thought a very brief history of the airport itself. I think it'd be helpful to talk about the state law as far as the structure for airport authorities. And then, again, an overview of the discussions that have been happening in about a little over the last year. Then again, somewhat recently, the salary increase request, we'll call it, from the Municipal Airport Authority for the Executive Director, and then sort of the latest draft of the 2 proposals that the mayor has presented here and asked me to draft. And then finally, we'll just talk a little bit about, we'll answer any questions, but then the extent you want to move into executive session, I think we're authorized to do that should you decide to do so with a vote. So that's the basis of the talk. I thought it might be helpful just to say at the outset what this is not about, because there's been a little bit of a misunderstanding, I think, over time about what the Municipal Airport Authority is. This is not about a dispute regarding their powers. I think the powers are pretty clear as to what the Airport Authority can and can't do. For example, one thing they can do is employ the Executive Director and all the other employees that work out there. I don't think there's any dispute about that. So what we're kind of been talking about is been some discussion about what the past has been but there is sort of a sense of what the reality is today, and then just how we want to clarify that reality going forward. That's really the theme behind this conversation. So again, brief history. Fargo Airport operations began in the late 20s, a gift from the Hector family in 1927. And the city owned and operated the airport for some time. In 1959, there was state legislation that created this Airport Authorities Act, and that authorized cities and combinations of cities and counties to appoint airport authorities to run airports. And the city of Fargo, 10 years later, in 1969, the city commission did approve a resolution creating the Municipal Airport Authority, and later that year sort of formed an agreement to transfer the operations to the Municipal Airport Authority. We'll talk a little bit about the terms in a moment here. Again, operations were turned over, and there was a provision in there that sort of still exists in a sense today. The agreement says the Airport Authority would get assistance from the city, use of its treasurer auditing department, and will continue to regard the employees of the Airport Authority as city employees for the purpose of the city employees pension plan. And then that agreement indicated the term of this lease will be 10 years, which then would end in 1979. I think it's helpful maybe to say that I don't know how many employees there were at the airport at the time, but the then executive, or the airport manager had been a city employee for, I don't know, over 20 years before then, and then transferred over to be the executive director of the airport when the Airport Authority was created. And so you can just imagine this idea where he was in the city pension plan and just was going to flop over. And that was part of the crux of that agreement in 1969. Since 1979, when sort of the agreement seemed to end by its own terms, certainly the finance and auditors' role has increased. Perhaps they handle payroll, but now that has become handled in part by human resources, but certainly human resources in terms of intake of new employees, that role has expanded considerably on the city side. We didn't have information systems departments in 1979, and so we have that, and there's support provided there. Streets and Mains, principally Forestry Department, provides a little bit of assistance. It's not a huge item, but those scope of services have expanded since 1979, and again, without really the benefit of a particular agreement that clarified all of this. And I think in part that's probably contributing to a little bit of what's been going on in the recent years. That contract talked about an initial payment of $30,000, and my understanding was there was an annual payment to the city of $30,000 for some time. Again, anecdotally, I've kind of heard it was sort of based on a sense of how much of a full-time equivalent would be needed in the auditor's office that justified that particular amount. Some time ago, that amount was increased to $50,000, and there's been discussion in the past few years that probably needs to be increased beyond $50,000. I think at some point within the last couple of years, the Airport Authority budget has had, I think, a $90,000 item in there, but that's never really been paid over, never been totally, mutually agreed upon. There is a matter of FAA regulations because the FAA is very closely involved in providing the economic model for airports that are run. The FAA regulations preclude cities from disproportionately allocating expenses to airports, and you can imagine why. So that they're entitled to share and centralize services and so forth, but you can't have a disproportionate allocation. That's part of the conversation as to how much is the right number to pay for whatever the support the city provides. In any event, since 1979, really that relationship continued. After that agreement expired, it continued largely unchanged. So again, the issue of sort of who is the employer of those 27 airport employees, including the executive director, assistant executive director, and so forth, who is the employer? If you talk to the executive director, he says he answers to the Municipal Airport Authority, and that all the city does is supply support. On the other hand, if you talk to people at City Hall, they say, well, we've been treating them as city employees as long as anybody can remember. Again, not disputed that they have the authority to be the employer of those airport employees, but that's been a little bit of the question that's become more prominent here. So what does it look like currently? All the airport employees are on the city payroll. They get a City of Fargo paycheck on the city's tax ID number, withholding, FICA, federal and state unemployment. Those are all accounts held in the name of the City of Fargo. I suspect if you ask them, whose employees are they would just assume they're City of Fargo employees. They've either participated in the city employee pension plan, and when we flopped over and some of our employees went over to North Dakota PERS for pension services, again, some airport employees went into there as well with the ND PERS. So airport employees are both participate in the city employees pension plan and ND PERS. City health, dental insurance, and other benefits, they enjoy just as they are a city employee. So in the end, it's a typo here, but really the thing is, no dispute that the Municipal Airport Authority can employ all of these people separately, but it's never really been set up that they are true employees of the Municipal Airport Authority with their own tax ID number and all of those things. Just as a point of comparison, relative to the pension plan, the Park District has been part of the city employee pension plan for many years. That's authorized specifically by the statutes that create the authority for park districts. Remember, of course, the Park District is a separate political subdivision, separate elected boards, not appointed, but elected. But there's some statutory language that allows cities to provide assistance. The city engineer is the ex officio engineer and surveyor for the Park District. Here they participate in the city employees pension plan, but there's no question that Park District actually employs its own employees completely independent of the city. I might add too that when ND PERS came into the fold for the City of Fargo, the Park District also did the same thing, but they have their own separate account with ND PERS for Park District employees. So again, this ends up sort of just calling attention to the question of what is the reality that we're dealing with here in terms of who is the employer and who is not. With respect to this issue of employment, there's just some merits of the decision to be discussed. I mean, what is the value to the 27 employees? What's the value of being a City of Fargo employee? It does have some significant value. Recently, within the last couple of years, there was a health insurance premium negotiated that resulted in $150,000 savings to the airport and to the airport employees as a result of the negotiated health insurance premium discussion the city undertook. Then again, there's the question, and we'll talk a little bit more later, of the value of the city supportive services, and it makes you wonder what the cost of getting alternative sources of those services and the equivalent levels of those services elsewhere. What would it take to do that? So again, just calling attention to some of the merits of that decision. Speaking of all the services, in your packet attached as an exhibit to one of the draft agreements that's in the packet, these are all listed in actually quite a bit more detail. As I was preparing this, I thought I wanted to summarize it, but to be honest, there's a long list of services, and I thought it might be helpful just to list them here. I may not read every one of them, but in terms that we've got services from finance, human resources, and IT principally. In terms of finance, accounts payable functions, there's a lot of fund accounting. There are a number of funds that money has to be held for the airport, and so they make those transfers into one fund or the other. City has adopted Chronos timekeeping for payroll processing and airport benefits from that. Again, we've talked about the pension, but that involves a fair amount of administration that's handled by finance. And then we have reporting and independent auditing, so apparently there are separate auditing type reports that are done for the airport, and the rest of these are listed. Again, with respect to human resources, we have, again, workers' compensation, which includes more than just sending a check to the state workers' comp people, but also handling and managing people's absences from work when they're injured in a workers' comp type injury, and a return to work process, a fair amount of interaction with those employees. With respect to with respect to the employment tax withholding and so forth, there is tax reporting that has to be done quarterly and annually, and that Human Resources takes care of that. mentioned retirement, both ND PERS and city pension. That requires administration. Again, you get current employees, but you also have retired employees, and our Human Resources Office is there to help retired employees as well. Again, there's health and dental insurance. The City of Fargo provides flex spending benefit, employee assistance program, and wellness program, and all of those require a fair amount of administration for those benefits, which is handled by HR. You have situations where you have, again, you think federal, but the state also has certain compliance requirements, equal employment opportunity and so forth. So HR ends up being the lead when there are any inquiries on that, whether they're city employees or whether they were airport employees under the current situation. Yeah, I think the rest of these, those items speak for themselves. Background checks, drug screening, things like that. There's an annual flu shot. Mayor was just mentioning it at the beginning here. The city employees get free annual flu shots. If it's covered by insurance, we take the insurance, but otherwise it's free to city employees. We have a city employee recognition program. We have a new launchpad training that's rather elaborate, and we have diversity training. We have a training coordinator that provides that type of assistance, all available to the airport. And then on to information systems. A fair amount of support provided by information systems. They, to the extent possible, they treat, I think it's fair to say, they treat the airport like a department with the city, which included running, trunk line fiber, or at least acquiring trunk line fiber all the way to the airport, to the extent that was feasible out to the airport terminal. And then when the fire station came along, kind of came offline from the air guard and into the airport itself, and had to come up with a special arrangement so that those, so that fire station could have wireless connection and so forth. So they are totally backed or linked into the city's computer server and network, including cybersecurity, which is offered in connection with the state system. And there's redundancy, and again, telephones and paging system, and support of all that by IT. Again, forestry and fleet management as part of Streets and Mains Department provides some assistance for forestry, some tree health services and planning services, and fleet management provides some assistance as well. So that's an overview of the various support and services provided by the City of Fargo for the benefit of the airport. Again, kind of takeaways here. I've been getting city paychecks from the airport since really the inception of the Municipal Airport Authority. Always received support. The scope of the support has increased significantly, and again, all without any particular written understanding to clarify those relationships. So again, a few minutes to talk about Airport Authorities Act under Chapter 2-06 of the North Dakota Century Code and what it says. Try and summarize it as succinctly as I can, hitting the high points. First of all, as mentioned already, the Municipal Airport Authority was created by the Fargo City Commission resolution. That's called for by that particular chapter in the state law. So there is that resolution that was enacted in 1969. That chapter also provides the airport authority that's been so created with a number of powers. I haven't listed them all here, but these are sort of highlights. They have the power to enter into their own contracts. They can acquire and own their own property. All the property that is owned, you might say, by the airport is in the name of the Municipal Airport Authority of the City of Fargo. They own that property. They can use eminent domain powers. If they need property for a runway or for other public purpose, they have that authority. They have taxing authority. It's sort of limited when it comes to if they were to issue bonds and would need to issue a mill levy to pay the debt service on those bonds. They're authorized to certify that mill levy, and the city is required to sort of feed that into its budget. To the extent that it's not required for debt service, you could call that discretionary, I guess, in a way, but if they have a need, they can present that need to the City Commission for additional mill levies, and the City Commission has the power to grant or deny that request and feed it into the airport mill levy. There is a maximum of 4 mills for the airport. Again, 2-0606, the Municipal Airport Authority has the power to employ an executive director and other employees to set the compensation of those people and set their duties. There's a specific statute also that talks about airport authorities sort of asking cities for assistance, and cities being authorized to provide cooperation and assistance. The city could lend or donate money to the authority, provide treasurer services, and frankly do all things not otherwise prohibited by law, and enter into agreements for that type of cooperation. So that's the structure behind the creation of a municipal airport authority. Does the city have any authority to oversee the airport authority? Yes, it does. I already mentioned sort of the mill levy oversight, so I won't go into that again. There is language in there about municipal airport authorities being able to issue revenue type bonds or debt. They can also ask the city, and that has been done in the past, where the city commission sort of agrees to back the bonds and give a general obligation like bond backing. So I don't know if that's so much oversight, but they certainly have input into that type of arrangement. Again, the city appoints the board members, as you well know. Typically happens about March of every year. You appoint a replacement or a new or re-up of a board member. There are 5 of them, of course. And ultimately, at any time, and this actually was enacted in the 2017 legislature, that a city commission can, by resolution, decide that it wants it to sort of replace the Municipal Airport Authority Board and become the Municipal Airport Authority. So does the city commission have certain powers of oversight? Yes, they do, and that's an outline of those powers. Takeaways again, Airport Authority created by City Commission, but the Airport Authority does have powers and has autonomy with the limits we've discussed. City Commission has oversight. City Commission could replace the Airport Authority with itself, or it can also dissolve the Airport Authority and just take it over as a city-owned airport. But the city and the Airport Authority can agree upon a cooperative arrangement. So we'll talk a little bit about the, you might say, the agreement or memorandum of understanding discussion that's been happening. It started in approximately October 2017. There was a meeting between the mayor and 2 representatives of the Municipal Airport Authority. Staff was all present. I was present as well. And from that meeting, there was a decision made that we would try and put a draft of an MOU together, an agreement the mayor asked if the city could be the first one to draft the agreement, and said we would draft it as though they will remain city employees. We recognize you may have something in response, but that's the initial draft. And in December 2017, that's what we presented, that they would remain city employees and that the city would provide all of these services. And the list I just went over was principally in that agreement. A few months later, in February, the Airport Authority replied with a draft where they just made it clear that no, these employees will be the Airport Authority's employees. And they also agreed they would like services. They kind of crossed off some things that they didn't feel they needed. Both drafts sort of left it blank as to what services would actually be provided and what the cost would be. So that's sort of been yet to be determined. And I already alluded to this, but that is something that we need to come to an agreement upon if we're going to provide services, we being the city. And the airport, of course, is very attuned to the fact that it needs to comply with FAA regulations regarding allocation of centralized services. And then somewhat recently, then the mayor thought that it would be helpful to the process to just simply present 2 types of agreements. I just call them Plan A and Plan B. The one was similar to the first draft, sort of an agreement whereby the structure is retained, the status quo is retained. Airport employees are city employees with city benefits, tries to clarify that relationship. If that's going to be the case, there would need to be some clarification. Okay, so if the executive director is a city employee, okay, you've got an airport authority that gives oversight and direction. Where does that executive director fit into the governance? So that needs to be clarified, but that would be part of that agreement. And again, there's just be identified as a payment to the city for the services that will be provided. And Plan B was the alternative, which, again, as the draft proposes, the structure's changed. Municipal Airport Authority becomes the employer. The way the agreement reads is that, okay, you will no longer be paid on a City of Fargo paycheck. We'll have to have a transition period to get that in place, but the Airport Authority would have to sort of get their own accounts with workers' comp and FICA and all of those things, get their own account with ND PERS for retirement, and get all that lined up. So it'd be a period of transition that would be contemplated, but that's the Plan B proposal. So those are the two drafts that the mayor asked that I prepare, and those are in your packet. And again, I think what really is the situation is begging for some direction from the City Commission for negotiations that thus far have been undertaken by the mayor. And again, somewhat recently, literally within the last 2 weeks or something like that, the issue of the executive director's salary has come to the forefront here. And again, so in terms of executive session, it's a decision that you as a City Commission make, but clearly the law allows when the city is involved in negotiations with another party and where discussion can't occur publicly without some kind of adverse fiscal effect on the bargaining position. And I always think of the used car, right? If you know what I'm willing to offer, you might not take my first offer. So I mean, you do need some assistance in finding out what the parameters might be in terms of negotiation. That's the kind of thing that you can move into executive session and discuss privately. So let me take a minute to talk about and bring you up to speed with the salary increase request from the Municipal Airport Authority. Just at the end of October, the Airport Authority Board met and approved a motion approving a 3-year compensation package for their executive director. It was based upon an earlier study that had been done, I think, sometime around 2015. Subsequently, a memo came to Bruce Grubb from Major General Mike Haugen, who's, I believe, in the audience here today, and that indicated what the decision and recommendation had been made by the Municipal Airport Authority and request. That request was limited to just the executive director. There weren't any other employees in the request. And so Grubb took that and sort of placed it in the routine process. I'll talk about the routine process in a moment here. And then shortly thereafter, a letter came from counsel for the Airport Authority clarifying that memo and just saying, you know, that when we sent the memo, that wasn't intended to be a recommendation. That really was our decision from the Municipal Airport Authority, and the purpose of the memo was to say that's a notice of the decision. So again, kind of placed it squarely in issue. The nature of the raise, as laid out by General Haugen's memo, was, again, a 3-year increase. The first year would be retroactive to the first of this year, 1st of 2018. It called for an 11% increase from the current salary to $170,000. Year 2 would start December 1, 2019, another 11% increase, bringing it up to $189,000. And then year 3 appears to be one or two of the possibilities, twice the amount of the COLA, whatever that is that's awarded, or 10%, but that brings it up to $208,000. So that would be for year 2020. I'll allude to this later, but starting in 2016, the executive director has also received an automobile allowance of $9,600 and a cell phone allowance of $2,400. Those two numbers add up to $12,000 a year. So in the next slide, I'll have taken the year 1, 2, and 3 and added $12,000 to each one of them. So just as just for some perspective here, I put on this slide the proposal, again, adjusted for the $12,000 auto and cell allowance, and compared it to the compensation by the city for their highest department head compensation. And again, I just isolated year 2. That's 2019, the upcoming year. Again, with the $12,000 additor, the Airport Authority's executive director would get $201,000, and our highest paid department heads have a salary of $167,000 upcoming, And there is an automobile allowance that department heads get, unless they already get a fleet car. It's like $34 pay period. That adds up to about $900. So I added that in there. That's $168,000. So that's the comparison, 201 to 168. If you're comparing those two positions. Then the next slide here is not the highest department head, but the highest pay grade in the city's employment system. And again, the salary for 2019 there is $190,000, $900 a year automobile allowance. That brings it up to $191,000 compared to what's being proposed by the Airport Authority for its executive director. Just a few notes. Not my intention here to go through all the arguments pro and con, but in terms of responsibilities, leave it to others to argue the points fully, but in terms of their employee management responsibilities, the city administrator oversees 997 total city employees, some 10-plus departments or divisions, and then the airport executive director, again, there are 27 total employees, I think, including the executive director. One thing, the study, or at least a portion of the study at least, but I think the study was attached to General Haugen's memorandum, and it's been looked at by our human resources, and that study uses some different methodology, different sampling, maybe in some ways for good reason, but certainly a different study than the methodology used by the city. And then the last point is, if this were ultimately approved as part of the city's plan, it would have arguably an effect of some sort, impact on the city employee pension plan, and the city in the time it's had hasn't had the opportunity to study what that impact would be. So I just wanted to call attention to that. I mentioned that Bruce Grubb took the memorandum from General Haugen, kind of put it into the usual hopper, how those requests been handled in the past when they've come from the airport. We've followed city employee policy number 300-0002, that talks about position evaluation and classification. Typically requests from departments for either upgrades or changes, or when somebody's job increases responsibility, needs to be sort of reclassified. Those kind of things go to the PEC, the Position Evaluation Committee. They evaluate it. They make a recommendation, and that recommendation then goes on to the City Commission. City Commission decides whether to approve or reject it. That has been the past process with the airport, and so this is a little bit of a variance from that. There was a situation just a few years ago, a request came in from the Airport Authority, also talking about an increase for the executive director, and I think maybe the assistant executive director as well. In that situation, my understanding is it didn't go to City Commission. The PEC did recommend a denial of the increase at that time, but included in there was this auto and cell phone allowance I've already referenced of $12,000. The Airport Authority said, you know, we can do this. We don't need your approval for that. And so that's where it was left. They just authorized that allowance, and that's commenced in January 2016 and been paid out on a monthly basis since then. So again, what's different this time than in the past? Again, the Airport Authority sort of for the first time has not said this is a recommendation. We're just notifying you of our decision. And they asked, and I quote from it, changes in compensation to the executive director be implemented as voted on by the board. That was a letter from Airport Council. And it sort of leaves city staff with a problem that they need assistance from you on, because the staff doesn't feel authorized to implement a salary increase without City Commission action. And again, I just call attention to the fact we just don't have an agreement with the Airport Authority that addresses these kind of issues. So that's the background.
So,
Mr. Grinberg.
So I'd like to, great presentation, but we're really getting off cue of the whole point that you just made about not having an agreement. All the other stuff is kind of just stuff right now. Can you go back to the slide, Eric? It's probably, I don't know, 15, 20 slides back, that you had Century Code cited as responsible. There it is right there, setting compensation and duties.
Yep.
So when I listened to your presentation, and then we talked earlier today, you know, it truly is apples and oranges as I see it, and to the point this thing has gone on way too long without having an agreement and an expectation and clarity. But whether or not if the city's providing services to the airport employees, that doesn't always constitute or should constitute that they're employees of the city of Fargo. And that, to me, it's apples and oranges when you come back to the statute.
Well,
So when you say that they're city employees, we treat them as city employees, legally, they're not.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, and
Well,
again,
you should know. You're the lawyer.
well, there are.
Yes or no? Are they city employees legally? We're providing services, or are they employees legally of the airport
I think
authority?
legally they're city employees.
So
I
what,
think they're legally
let's
city
why?
employees, but if the airport authority wants to make an argument that for some reason, because being an employee, if I'm an employee of somebody, I might have a boss, that determines who's my boss. So in
Is it
this
anybody
case,
at the
the
city?
executive director would say, gee, the boss is the airport authority. That's my boss, so I'm employed by them. Yeah, but who pays you? And where are all your benefits?
So let me
And-
give you another
yeah.
simple analogy. I used to work for a company that my paycheck came from Payroll Solutions.
Mm-hmm.
So the city of Fargo is providing a paycheck as a service to the airport authority. They're an entity providing a service, and I wasn't an employee of Payroll Solutions.
But I bet you had an agreement that identified all of that.
Bingo.
Yeah.
So that's the debate here,
We don't
is
have
the
an-
agreement.
And we don't have an agreement, and so, again, it can be argued, and I don't question at all that it can be argued. Sort of the position I've been trying to take on behalf of the city is, does the history matter terribly? This screams out for a need for some kind of mutual understanding. Let's clean it up one way or the other. And if you were to say, well, gee, can we make it so that they're on city payroll, but we just agree they're employed by the airport authority? Maybe that's possible. I have no reason to say it couldn't be possible, just like your situation.
But you already said there's a section in statute that allows that to be possible. You cited a statute saying we can provide services legally.
Right.
To an
Yes, I mean.
Okay, so, thank you.
Commissioner Garrick.
I just honestly believe I can't believe we waited this long to get an AG's opinion. What would it take for us to ask the AG to step in and say, hey, tell us what this state law means? We think it's this, they think it's that. Tell us what it is. I can't imagine it would take a week.
We already talked to the AG's office, and they want us to do our MOU first. He said the two parties should work it out, do an MOU, and then if we have a disagreement, then he'll look at it. But to Tony's point, we probably don't have any authority. He's not the authority to decide which one the MOU is. They can be on their own. All I'm requesting, let's have an MOU and practice whatever it is.
I can't imagine that to be true, because we're not the only city that has an airport. And other airports operate different ways. We can operate this way, they can operate that way, that's fine. But per state law, there should be clarity. And if there's not, we need to get clarity from the state.
He won't give clarity. He asked us to make the MOU. I asked that. I said, I'll send you both MOUs. Which one do we pick?
And I
Said,
think
you guys pick
In all
it.
fairness, I think there are some narrow issues that relate to employment law that the Attorney General's office won't be able to opine about. It's just a reality. I mean, the question will be, how is governance handled? If there's a problem with the employees, where does HR go to report that problem? To the city commission? Well, no. To municipal airport authority? Well, I don't know. I mean, and yet the city might be responsible for those because they're on our paycheck. So there's some issues that can't be all resolved just with an AG's opinion.
Commissioner Pipcorn.
Just a couple of quick things. The one thing we have to keep in mind is we all have the same boss, and that's the taxpayers of Fargo. They're our boss. They're the airport authority's boss, and they're the commission's boss. The other thing is, the airport authority we appoint them. And so if they're not accountable to us, to have an entity that's controlling tax money and be accountable to nobody, that can't continue. So those are the things I think we have to keep in mind. And the other thing is, the airport is critical to our town. Economic development, everything, the airport is vital. It's a very important thing. And we have to be like this. We can't be like this. And I'm getting a lot of this. And so that's a very bad thing. Thank you.
Commissioner Goering.
I'm having a hard time because there's a yes or no answer here. They're going to give him a raise. and they're going to call them their employees, and then we're going to say, no, they're not, but someone's got to be right, because either he's going to get a raise or he's not. You know what I mean? So even MOU or not, I'm all for getting MOU, by the way. In fact, I think that the raise is too much, quite frankly. But I also don't believe that we have any authority to stop them based on what's on this slide, that they can hire people and they can set their compensation. That is pretty black and white to me. If we don't like it, Dave, you're right. We do appoint them. And our only repercussion at this point then would be to remove the members that we don't think are doing a good job as they come up for reappointment, or we can take that ability away from them and become the airport authority. That's the only two things we can do. We don't have the right to tell them how to run things unless we take over that position.
So it leads us to a motion. Commissioner Strand.
I have a question, if I might, Mayor, and maybe Eric, but so there was an agreement struck in 1969 that had a 10-year lifespan, and it's expired. And we've been operating without an agreement since 1979. So that's an obvious issue to address, is that I think all parties would want an agreement in place. I don't know how the best approach to that agreement is, whether we do it through litigation or threatening each other, or we all get together and agree on it. I don't know if going into an executive session or not I don't know. But what seems clear to me is we need to get an agreement in place that's contemporary. My sense, Commissioner Grinberg, in legislative issues is we need to honor the intention of the legislation when they make a legislation, or honor the intention of contracts and agreements when they're made. It seems to me that, cursory looking at this, that it would seem the intention was that the airport authority act autonomously but under the jurisdiction and auspices of the city, and that their people would be employees of the city. That seems to be what was the intention and has been the practice. So where I'm at is let's sit down and pound out the new agreement and agree that we have to agree, or the consequences are we need somebody else to intercede to help us sort out whose jurisdiction it is. My thinking is we don't turn the apple cart upside down, or we don't abandon previous activities. So in my head, that means for the moment present, the city, the airport's employees are city employees. And if the past practices have meant that wages and salaries and compensations and benefits packages go through the city, that's probably the way it should go. And I don't know how you can separate one employee out versus all the rest. So I don't know if an executive session is where we go with this or not. We obviously have an outdated an agreement that's not up to date. It's decades old. So what's your advice we do with that?
Again, I mean, my advice is to move forward with discussions about the MOU, and as part of that, discuss and decide how to structure this employment. I think there are some nuances about employment that make it a lot simpler to decide whether they're city employees or if they're going to be municipal airport authorities. Fine, then just get your own account, get your own tax ID number, and if you need assistance, I assume the city is willing to provide that assistance, just like it did before, only with their own accounts. That makes that structure a lot more, just a lot simpler all the way around. You've got a clear line of authority from municipal airport authority to its executive director. In terms of pay, you can figure out your own pay scale. That doesn't create any problems as it has in the past here. So that's my recommendation. All of that's through negotiations with an agreement. And I don't have any reason to believe we'll have a difficult time with the airport authority and come to terms with all of that. I think we're just looking, this is something that hasn't been brought to you as a city commission as a whole, and it just seemed like time for a status report and find out a little bit which direction you might be leaning. And I think you're providing some helpful input in that regard.
The reason you go in executive session to give direction to the mayor which way to go on this. I have two options in which they can be city employees, or they can be other than that. In a meeting several months ago, Sean Doberstein there said the real issue here is compensation, and now it's been isolated to compensation of the executive director. There's no input as far as any changes for any of the other employees. So, and Mr. Gary, you say you're maybe not happy with that amount. You have to go into executive session to give me some direction of which way you want me to go. I can't, you can talk about it publicly if you want, but the reality is, you have one MOU or a second MOU. You have an executive director that has a comp package. Now, in the past, what would happen if this didn't go further, we just would honor the request by the airport authority. But the airport authority has put out, we have the authority, you are going to pay him this. So direction from the commission is what I need, because I really cannot act on my own. I think the commissioners have to stand up and tell me what you want me to do, because that's where it's at. Tony served on there as the liaison, and Dave is serving there now as the liaison. But I think we have to have an open discussion, because nobody's touched this thing for 50 years. You might as well just figure it out, and then let's go on and live together. But that's where I think it has to go, so there's a suggested motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make the suggested motion, and then we can have further discussion, and I'll read it if that's okay. I move that the City Commission meet in executive session and to discuss negotiating strategy and to provide negotiating instructions to its negotiator, and also to consult with its attorneys regarding possible agreement between the city and the Fargo Municipal Airport Authority. Said executive session being necessary because of negative fiscal effect on the bargaining position of the city would result if discussions regarding such negotiations were to occur in an open meeting. Said executive session being authorized by North Dakota Century Code Section 44-04-19.1, subsections 2 and 9.
Is there a second? Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there a discussion?
The only thing I would say is we're two public entities, and I think the public should be able to hear what our thought process is. And we also want to be on the same page as the airport authority. The only way for the majority of the airport authority can hear what the majority of the city commission are on the same page is if we speak to each other. And the only way we can speak to each other is if we're in public, because we're public entities. So I don't want to go into an executive session. I'm not saying that's illegal. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying I would rather speak it out loud in public so that people know where we're at, because I think a lot of the problem that's happening here is we've been hearing from one person, another person, one at a time, and that's not very effective.
Any other discussion?
Well, I struggle with, too, whether we need to do this in executive session. We have two recommendations. I mean, I get the point. It's been a long decades to move this through, so I don't know what we're going to accomplish in executive session other than what the two proposals are, so I'm struggling.
You could come out with a new proposal. You could say we treat them like city employees, but the executive director is separate. You could do a variety of different options. You just have to tell me what you want to do.
Well, you have brought two proposals forward.
I brought anything for consideration, as you know, in discussion. Anybody can come up with solutions. I'm asking the commissioners to weigh into what they want. I don't want to argue for something that you don't want. Commissioner Strand.
I have a question. Is it General Haugen? Are you the chairman of your vice chairman? Do you have anything to say to us? I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but
Well, that's okay. Sorry that the chair's out of town, otherwise she'd be here. The one thing that you looked at and that the legal counsel has provided is the statute that says we, the municipal airport authority, hires and sets salary. That was on the screen. I would also ask that you look at where does the money come from that pays all the people at the airport's salary. It's not city money. It's municipal airport authority money that's collected from parking fees and is a separate account and is reimbursed to the city for all of those paychecks. It is not city money.
But you do have a 2 mil levy that you do. It's worth $1 million.
That's correct, but that's for other issues. All the money that we
Goes into
operate
the
on,
operation of the airport.
the operations of the airport is paid for by parking fees and in contract with SP Parking right now.
So, Mr. Chairman, this is the crux of the problem. Their attitude is, this isn't taxpayers of Fargo's. This is the Municipal Airport Authority's money. This is our money. The payment of Sean, that's our money. We already have it paid for. And that's absolutely incorrect. This is the public's money. This is taxpayer money. And if they're not accountable to anybody. That's the attitude. This is our parking revenue. We can spend it, and that's absolutely incorrect.
Well, I look at how the money is collected. It is nothing to do with taxpayers. It's fees that people pay to park. So if we were to have a personnel firm from downtown, as Commissioner Grenberg mentioned, there would be no money transferred to the city. So they would be paid for from municipal airport funds. So it's not that we're not accountable to the city for operating the airport. And also, if you look at the executive director's salary, you look at, he has not had a pay raise in several years. So prior to my attending and coming on the airport authority, they found a way to give him a salary increase by a car allowance because he didn't meet the pay grades in the city. But I also look at other entities. Look at NDSU, the president's salary, okay? Highest paid individual. Oh, except, let's look at the football coach. It's based on supply and demand. The demand for a great airport executive director is very high, and we have one. And we're trying to retain him. And we did a study, as you, Mr. Mayor, asked for, to look at supply and demand around the country and other airports, other reasonable size or regional sizes like ours. You look at what our executive director has done in the last 2 years by bringing in FedEx and UPS, the number of jobs we provide. We're now going to have higher number of freight operations per day than passenger operations. He's bringing in a great deal of money. And also the MOU that we're talking about and that we've tried to get with the city here for a couple of years now on compensation for hiring personnel actions, the FAA has control over that. So we went from 50,000 to 90,000, but the FAA has not approved that yet. So it's not like, you know, we're setting up a commercial business. The FAA has a definite say in what we charge, what we're allowed to charge, so that they don't look at redistribution of dollars in a way that takes away from aviation entities. So it's a little more complex than, well, we'll just do what we want, because the FAA has a say, and of course, statutory regulations from the state. So I don't disagree with Commissioner Pepcorn at all that we are accountable. We certainly are. And we work every day at taking care of the employees and the traveling public.
Just one point is that when we did the pay study for the city of Fargo in 2008, John was in that discussion. His salary over the last 10 years has gone from $98,000 to $155,000. He's got a steady raises all through that time. He's got either steps, or he's got grades, or he's got COLAs. So he hasn't just stood still on his salary comp.
What I mean is that he has not kept up with peers around several other states around here. And, well, I lost my point there.
Oh,
Sorry.
thank you. Commissioner Strand.
Thank you. And, you know, and as we all go forward and work out our resolution, you know, we are all on the same team.
Yeah.
And we are all on Fargo's team. And it's whatever's for the greater good of Fargo, and your service and your board service is really, truly appreciated, and we need to take that into account. A question I have, let's go back. This last budget cycle, when the city officials decided there'd be a 2% pay raise for staff across the board. Did that trickle down to all of your people?
I'm not sure I can answer that
A
without
pay
having
increase,
all the
or
data.
the year before, one of, you know, one
All
of-
his employees get our employees.
So that formula goes to the library, goes to the Fargo Dome Authority, to the airport authority. So those parameters, are they? They are accommodated. One of the problems I have with this whole place we're at is we need to depersonalize it. It doesn't matter who our executive director is, it's the position. And then in my head, it's all of our positions. It's not just one. You know, we've recently been approached by our fire department who are saying the same thing. They've done a peer review of their peers, and they're challenging us to realize that, in their opinion, they're not up to the same levels of reimbursement and pay and salary and compensation as other firemen in the region are, and that's the whole department. So these are in my head, we need to treat everybody exactly the same, equally and with equity and fairly, and that has to be a driving principle. I'm not so sure if we take one position out of that formula and separate it out and treat it differently, that's complying with that consistency or not. And that's kind of where my head goes. I just wish it wasn't about who the people are. It was about everybody, no matter what your title is, from the bottom to the top. That's how I want our city employees treated. And I understand, you know, your desires to, you know, we would feel bad if Bruce Grubb told us he was going to move across the river or something, and we'd do our best to try to keep him as a city administrator. I understand that too. So how we go forward from this, I'm not sure. It seems to boil down to the salary of the executive director, that this issue is revolving around. Plus, we're acting without an existing memorandum of agreement in place for decades.
You know, that's what bothers me most. I'm Tammy Lynn, thank you. That's what bothers me most, because when you appointed me, Mayor and Commissioners, I looked and I said, well, where are the updates? Where are the updates from the 1969? I mean, so that's the crux of it. And according to state statute, we are an independent entity that has our own employees. So it doesn't matter who the employees are. But so when you look, just because it's been done for 50 years that they've been treated as Fargo employees, and that's been fine. As you stated earlier, one of you, that when it started, it was because the person who was working at the city went over to the airport authority. There wasn't really a thought in it. And until you really dive into the state statute, as I have, because I'm a detailed person, and I want to follow the rules. And the rule of the law is that the municipal airport authority is an independent structure, and I don't have to read it. You guys have read it. I don't care what it is, whether it's an employee salary, whether it's IT services, we just need to really focus and get an MOU regardless of any salaries. The MOU will set it, but then what the MOU will do is it'll go back to the airport authority for that review as well. And we have been talking about this, and the Plan B from the mayor in your packet was our redlined plan. Because when you look at state statute, we feel utmost responsibility to be in compliance. And we have had a legal opinion by the Attorney General, and that was several years ago. And we went back to him, as the mayor probably has gone back too. Well, we went back to him, and he said he'd rather us use the past legal opinion, which stated that the Municipal Airport Authority was, according to the Century Code, an entity of its own. So I just think getting an MOU, let's get something that is working for both organizations and that follows Century Code and state statute, as well as the FAA. The $90,000 for the services has been in the budget for 2 years, but it had never been submitted or whether it hadn't been received by the FAA. So so we're intending to be good stewards and working with the city. And so that's what we want, is just a good MOU, and everything else, then let's move forward, because we are. The taxpayers, the people who use the airport, who pay for the parking fees. And by the way, it's not just parking fees. We have employment fees. Just with UPS coming in, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars of new income for the airport to help pay for upgrades, to help pay the employees, and that includes 60 to 90 new employees for UPS. And those things have all been done. And by the way, when the salary survey was requested, the salary survey that was done, we also got an updated salary survey, which is, we provided you that information. So even at that point, and it doesn't matter what the salary is, but that was requested by the mayor.
But don't you also get an employment every time anybody goes on an airplane? Don't they pay a fee to go on the airplane?
It has been for years, right?
Pardon?
It has been for years.
Yeah.
And that
But that's
is-
like $4, $5, and that's used to operate the airport?
That's partly used to operate the airport. But if I don't fly, I'm not paying it.
I know, but if you use the airport, you're
Right.
paying a fee. It's just, I mean, there's other ways you get,
Oh, yeah.
you get parking, you get that.
And, you know,
Employment,
we-
it's really great to have freight come in here. It works out very well
Freight,
for us.
parking, there are other sources of income as well. The farmland, as you said, I mean, we have to pay specials. We are an independent entity that has to pay specials, that has to pay all these things too. So, anyway, I just wanted to kind of clarify that, because I think Mr. Haugen said it very clearly, we just want to work together, and it's time to move on and get an MOU where we can establish those relationships, so we don't know, and we aren't saying, well, why are you doing that, or why are you doing this? No, let's lay it out there. Because I don't know about you, but in a document, in a legal document, in a business document, if you don't say who's responsible for what, there's always going to be some sort of negative discussion, because you think you should be doing this, and that's all we're asking. So, thank you very much.
Commissioner?
Mayor, I call the question on the motion.
Roll call vote, please.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Strand?
Yes.
Garrick?
No.
Grinberg?
Aye.
Mahoney?
Aye. So we'll go into executive session, and then we'll come back when we're done.
You could just
Call the meeting back to order. Executive session is finished at this time. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Hey, Tony, great to have you back. Thanks.
Thank you.